Trauma doesn't just shape what you remember. It shapes how your body interprets what's happening in the now. And when you look closely, what we call psychological and biological, or mental and physical, are often the same pattern, just expressed through different systems. I'm Dr. Kenny, an IFM certified functional medicine practitioner, and part of my work is helping people connect patterns just like this between the nervous system, stress physiology, and long-term health. Because once you see how your lived experiences shape nervous system wiring, what feels random starts to resolve into something far more predictable and influenceable. So let's start by looking at how trauma impacts nervous system development and why that matters for the patterns we see later in life. Most people think trauma is about what happened. They don't realize that it's also what the body learned to expect as a result of trauma. When people hear the word trauma, they place it in a mental health category almost immediately. Memories, emotions, childhood, difficult events that left a psychological impact. But that's only part of the story, because trauma doesn't just change how you think. It changes how your body physically responds as well. It can shape the nervous system, influence your stress tolerance and resilience, and alter how your systems communicate and respond to stressors over time. So if you've been dealing with fatigue, anxiety, depression, sleep issues, or even gut issues and hormonal concerns, those aren't always separate problems. This is one of the core limitations around our current medical paradigm. Physical and mental health are treated as separate categories and siloed as if the overlap is secondary. But when you look closely at the function and the chemistry, you realize that these are not separate domains. They are the same pattern, the same influence through different systems. And that's where systems biology and functional medicine thinking comes in. When you realize trauma and the mind and the body cannot be separated, it starts to affect the way that you really see physiology. And many chronic health patterns stop feeling as disconnected as we treat them. So the question, especially when you dive into trauma with a trauma-informed practitioner, isn't what happened to you simply. It's what your body learned from that experience. And one of the most important places to look is in the nervous system and its chemistry itself. This idea sometimes blows my mind, and it's that your nervous system is not reacting to the world as it is. It's responding to what it has learned the world to be over time. Let that digest. One of the simplest ways that we can think about the nervous system is as the body's internal alarm system. It is constantly scanning the environment and interpreting, asking a very basic question beneath the surface. Am I safe or am I not? And your body organizes itself around that answer. Whatever it determines is the truth. If your system registers enough safety, it can invest energy into learning, digestion, recovery, shifting the body into connection and long-term repair. But if it detects a threat or operates at a baseline stressed out level, especially repeated or developmental stress, it organizes around protection instead. That doesn't just influence how you feel, it shifts how your entire system operates and responds. This is where the phrase survival mode can be most useful, as long as we use it precisely. We're not describing a personality type or something superficial. We're describing a nervous system that has learned to bias toward vigilance, urgency, shutdown, or even reactivity, because at some point that response was adaptive as a protective mechanism. Does this sound familiar to you at all? And this is where the misinterpretation tends to happen a lot. It can feel like something is wrong with you, when in reality, your system learned something consistent based on your environment. We are adaptable beings. It doesn't always mean the adaptation is really in our favor for long-term health and vitality. Trauma isn't all or nothing either. It isn't limited to one obvious event or another. For some people, it's developmental, familial, abuse. For others, it's chronic stress. Others still, it's a long pattern of instability or unpredictability or not feeling safe in an environment, especially in our developmental years, but not exclusively to that. The body learns from all of it. And once that pattern starts shaping the body's priorities for too long, the effects don't just stay in the nervous system alone. They begin to show up across systems everywhere else in the body. At a certain point, stress stops being something that you feel or perceive, and it becomes something that your body naturally organizes around. Once that alarm system has been active long enough, the conversation shifts from stress as an experience to stress as a functional state. This is where a concept known as allostatic load becomes useful in this conversation. Allostatic load is the cumulative wear and tear, or the body burden of stress and this chronic stress response when it's activated repeatedly or it doesn't fully resolve. The stress response is not designed to be constant. It's meant to activate when it's needed and then it returns to baseline. But when that reset doesn't happen consistently, the body adapts to that state as if it were normal. This is where many people start chasing the wrong problem in their health journey. Energy becomes less stable, sleep maybe becomes more lighter or fragmented. Recovery takes longer than usual from working out or any other type of activity. And small stressors start to feel disproportionate. This is often interpreted as burnout or reactivity or aging, or you need to just push harder in our culture. But again, more often, it is a system that is organized around protection for so long. A 2022 systematic review and meta-analysis found that higher allostatic load was associated with an increased risk of both overall mortality and cardiovascular disease. So this isn't just something that you feel. This is something that your body is physically reacting to as well, at the chemical level. And if you're one who likes the research, I've included a free research summary that you can download. It's in the pinned comment and the description below. Easy to digest articles and my take on them as well. If you're starting to recognize yourself somewhere in this pattern, that's usually a first useful signal that you're looking in the right place. Because once your allostatic load builds, it starts to trickle into multiple systems at once. And I would argue that much of the chronic disease burden we experience is founded at least partially in chronic stress chemistry. When multiple systems start to feel off at the same time, it's rarely separate problems, and this is what weaves them together. It's a shared pattern being misread once again. This is a point where a lot of people also start to feel confused because you notice it's not just one issue, it's a cluster. And it can feel like everything is slightly off, but nothing fully explains the problem, and you may even get normal labs back. From a systems perspective, this is not random. The nervous system does not operate in isolation from the rest of our organs and body parts. It influences your hormones and your digestion and your energy and your immune activity. So when the nervous system is biased toward threat or protection, those signals do not stay contained to the nervous system. They propagate throughout. This is one of the primary reasons why functional medicine focuses on this systems-based thinking and interaction rather than isolated symptoms. The body isn't breaking down in separate compartments or disease entities. It is adapting as a whole. And this is why two people can follow the same diet, take the same supplements, do the same exercises, and have completely different results. Because the underlying system state and the cumulative lived experiences on their chemistry are fundamentally different. The misinterpretation is assuming that the inputs themselves are the problem, when it's actually the system that is interpreting those signals. But there is another layer that makes this even harder to recognize, and it has to do with how aware we actually are of what's happening inside of our systems. One of the biggest fundamental challenges is this, and let me know in the comments if you can relate to this. When a pattern has been there for long enough, it no longer feels like a pattern, it feels like you, a personality trait or similar. Trauma and long-term stress don't just affect regulation, they also affect our perception, and that changes how you interpret your own experience. If your system has been operating this way for a long time, it can start to feel normal. You may not even recognize it as strain at all. It's just part of your daily life. You may also just think that this is your personality, that you're bad at resting, or you can't meditate, or you've always been anxious, or maybe you're a perfectionist. But often what feels like identity is actually adaptation in disguise. And that's where it becomes very difficult to question. Our systems, our bodies adjust so thoroughly that the pattern becomes invisible from the inside. This is why people tend to downplay their stress, not only from the societal pressures, and it's not because they're ignoring it either, but because it's familiar. It's been consistent. It's what's worked to help keep things moving and keep you trucking along. Nothing wrong with that. And that's where the problem compounds. You can't fully work with a pattern or navigate through it if you haven't yet recognized it. Sometimes it takes another perspective to identify what is hard to see from the inside, especially at the chemistry level. So once you begin to see it more clearly, certain symptom patterns tend to repeat themselves in the context of survival mode. When this pattern is active in one of my patients, it rarely presents as a single symptom. It usually shows up as reduced resilience across multiple systems. Fatigue is probably one of the most consistent signals. Not just feeling tired, but noticing that your system doesn't recover the way that it used to. You could sleep well, or it becomes lighter, it just feels less restorative, or you have actual sleep disturbances. Your mood may also shift toward anxiety, reactivity, or similar, and the digestion becomes sensitive. Many of my patients in this systems-based experience in a traumatized nervous system also have lowered gut immunity that allows for opportunistic overgrowths and infections to occur. Hormone patterns become less stable in both men and women that I see as well, because our hormones are intricately connected to our stress chemistry. And there's often a subtle disconnect where you can feel the strain, but still minimize perhaps how significant it truly is. That pattern and these connections aren't random. When multiple systems start losing that flexibility at the same time, I don't think of it in terms of separate diagnoses or disease states. I think of it in terms of systems load. Again, this is where many people get stuck. They have been told that their labs are normal or that they're already doing all the right things. And from the outside, it appears that it's manageable, even functional. But when you step back, the pattern is more cohesive than it looks at a glance. It's long-term stress chemistry shaping the entire system. And the longer it's been present, the more deeply it tends to integrate into our systems. One of the reasons that integration runs so broadly is that the immune, metabolic, and emotional layers are far more connected than they appear. This is where stepping back and taking a biopsychosocial approach becomes so much more than just a philosophy. It becomes a practical way of understanding what you're experiencing and how it's all connected. Trauma and chronic stress chemistry don't stay contained in the thoughts or in the memories. They influence inflammation, metabolism, and how the brain and the body communicate with one another. A 2024 meta-analysis looking at adverse childhood experiences, or ACEs, and adult depression found that part of the relationship may be mediated by inflammation and energy production or metabolism pathways. This includes common inflammatory markers like interleukin-6 and CRP, or C-reactive protein. In plain language, this means that some of what you're experiencing or feel emotionally may be carried through these biological and measurable processes as well. In fact, there's compelling research that has not only debunked the serotonin theory of depression, but also leans to it being more of a chronic inflammatory condition. So if your symptoms have ever felt difficult to categorize, part physical, part emotional, maybe even part spiritual, that isn't a flaw in the explanation that you've been given. It's often a signal that the model being used to describe your situation is too narrow for the pattern that's actually there. This is one of the reasons I collaborate with counselors and other mental health practitioners on the regular, because they can help take a wider trauma-informed view. Not every pattern starts at the level of chemistry alone. Some of it begins in development, adverse childhood experiences, environment, and nervous system adaptation. And then It shows up biologically over time in chronic diseases ranging from heart disease to diabetes to even some cancers. Even with that broader understanding, it's still important not to reduce this into another oversimplified framework. One of the most common mistakes that I see with conversations around trauma is turning it into a binary. Either you had trauma or you didn't. Either you're in survival mode or you're not. Either this applies to you or it doesn't. But physiology doesn't organize itself that way. It's not black and white, it is a spectrum. Some patterns are obvious, others are more subtle. Chronic stress and instability or perfectionism, or years of pushing through without recognizing the silent cost it's taking on your systems by increasing your allostatic load. The body is still learning from all of it. The nervous system adapts, and those adaptations still shape your energy, your digestion, your hormone, your mood, and your long-term resilience. All of these areas we run to the doctor for without truly understanding what's affecting it underneath. This is why the conversation about trauma matters so much more, even just beyond chronic disease burden. It is possible to be highly functional on the outside while your system is carrying more load than it can sustainably manage. And that gap between how things appear on how the system is actually operating is where many people are stuck. Because from the outside, it looks like everything is working quite well. But from the inside, and at the chemistry layer, the system may still be organized around protection. Once that becomes visible, the goal starts to shift. I always say when you can define something, you can deal with something. Away from managing isolated symptoms and toward understanding the pattern that shaped the system's expression of those symptoms itself. If this helped you see your own pattern a little more clearly, please stay in the conversation, because if trauma can shape how the body learns to respond and adapt, the more useful question becomes how that pattern often shows up in everyday life. And that's exactly what this video on your screen explores, especially how chronic stress and overperformance can keep the system locked in the same protective state. I'm Dr. Kenny, Root Cause Health Detective. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.